Peter Salem, Salem Paul, Bunker Hill, well-known black soldier. He was referenced by everybody during the Battle of Bunker Hill as the most bravest soldier. And pretty soon they're going to have Salem Day, Peter Salem Day, and a holiday and a statue of him up there. So we're going to walk around. It goes fast. Any questions so far? No question. All right. Now, let me show you another picture. Another pictures.
Presents.
This is Boston. How many people have been to Quincy Market? That's Quincy Market. The top of this hill fills in between the west end and the north end of Boston. That's where Boston Garden, not stations. This is Washington Street, longest street in New England, named after the first president of the United States, George Washington. Starts in Boston, ends in Providence, Rhode Island. Providence is about 30 miles from here. Washington Street's over 100 miles in length. This is the Back Bay. This is the Charles River. So let me pass this around on this side. And I have another. I've got a picture of myself. Oh, I'm good looking, tell us. Wow. The other day I took a group of people to the Breakers down in Newport a couple of months ago, and I'm taking selfies. And the guy goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm taking selfies." "In the mirror?" I goes, "Yeah, can't you see yourself?" So I have all these selfies. Laughter does good like medicine.
Too funny.
So this is Boston, 1630. The Puritans settled north of Boston, Cape Ann, moved down to Salem, then went down to Charlestown, divided across the bay. By the first settler in Boston was Reverend William Blackstone, or Blackstone. And he lived here from 1624 with the Native Americans. He invited the Puritans over in 1630. He left around 1635. He went south, settled in Rhode Island. The only time he came back was to find himself a wife. And you'll find his plaque right down at the bottom of Beacon Street here, at the bottom of the hill where he lived, the site of. One of the reasons Boston Common is owned by us is because his backyard. So when he left, he wanted to sell the land to the Puritans, and no one had the money to pay for it. So they all chipped in. That's why Boston Common is owned by the people of Boston and not the city. And we have to remind the city, don't touch, it's not yours. And slowly but surely, they're doing it. So today...
Boston was just a little business island almost, huh?
Yeah, Boston originally was only 2 square miles. Today it's over 52 square miles. How many people have been to Logan Airport? Largest man-made land in the country.
Where?
They took East Boston.
Yeah. Well, they expanded East Boston.
I'm surprised. Is it all?
Because Logan Airport was 3 islands. And they combined them.
They still call Wood Island Station Wood Island
With us?
Station.
Yeah. Matter of fact, when we were digging over there, they found an old British ship that sank. So any questions so far?
The neck, the neck, okay.
All right, we'll go down this way. This is what it originally looked like. Designed by Charles Bulfinch. Designed in capital Washington, D.C. That's why they look the same. Very top of the Gold Dome. Anybody can tell me what's on the very top of the Gold Dome? Pine cone. Yeah. Because we were known as the Pine Cone State. And the tallest and straightest trees were known as the king's trees, and they would be marked. Because if you cut them down, it's treason, and you could be hanged. Wow. But if a windstorm came by and knocked that tree over, it's now yours. So Puritans, very simple people, they said that's a windfall. Very simple people. And a windfall. But originally it was a wooden dome. Then Paul Revere and Sons put a copper sheathing around it. It's painted black on the wall so the enemy will not use it as a target. That's pure leaf gold on top, valued over $1 million.
Wow.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm waiting for a long holiday like Christmas. No one, I'm going to get on the backside so no one can see me.
Did you say that's real gold?
But how
Pure
thick,
leaf gold. This is not.
Oh,
On
yeah.
this dome.
Oh, wow.
That's pure leaf gold.
how thick is it? How thick is it about? Like,
Oh, he scrapes them out.
You can read through it.
what's that?
Thinner than a sheet of paper.
It's thin,
Yeah. But it
Thin as
stays
a
there.
like leaf gold, leaves, real thin.
Yeah. But still, it stays there for a long time and it looks good though, huh?
It does, yeah. It's good, you pay for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, we got the gold.
With gold in the house, right?
Now, as I mentioned earlier, you're not allowed to just drop things off and then they put it in the State House. It has to go through committees. Right around here, on the other side of this, should be the story of creation. It shows you God's hands, what he making Adam. Now, a friend of mine, Dr. Paul Jailer, was here one time looking for the statue given to us by France. And you know, they're a little risque. But no docents here knew who it was. They never heard of this. There's nothing religious here, but you had the story of creation here. But sitting right behind him, he noticed the statue of David standing on the head of Goliath, given to us by France, for all we've done for them. And if you want, you can see the statue of creation, then walk quickly over to right behind the docents. The statue should still be there of Goliath, his head cut off, and David standing in front of him. And also when you come in, I'll meet you in the auditorium right over here. We'll talk about some paintings here. And you'll see a statue of Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. Generally, when you see one of them, you'll find the other in the same room. That's because George Washington saved the country. Abraham Lincoln kept it together. That's why you always see the statues together. Christian men who stood on principles and didn't fail us. And women. Don't forget the woman. As Abigail Adams told John Adams when he was going off to Philadelphia, John, don't forget the ladies. And there's a lot of ladies, there's a lot of history. So any questions so far? All right, so you're going in, then you can take your right foot.
The originals in the Musée d'Orsay. It's done in 1873.
The first one is Paul Revere's famous ride. Now I go by the name of Deacon John Lockett. Anybody ever hear about me in history?
That's a horse.
That's right. You heard about a good friend of mine, Paul Revere. Paul Revere had 16 kids. He outlived all but 5. And every time one of his children would pass away, he would always say, there goes another lovely lamb of mine. But Paul Revere didn't own a horse. So when he rode across the bay into Charlestown and started his famous ride, he borrowed my father's horse. It was a new breed of horse out of Narragansett, Rhode Island. Fastest horse around. Had no name to it, as a lot of people say it had a name. But back then it didn't really name horses as we do today. And so Paul Revere loaned my father's horse. I'm still looking for him, because I never got him back. When the British captured him, because he never finished his ride, he was captured, released several hours later. William Dawes was the first rider, Paul Revere was the second rider, and they kept my father's horse. Now, give you an idea, they both grew up in the North End, which is up here to the left of this picture. Paul Revere rode across the bay, started his ride in Charlestown. William Dawes, who was the first rider, but Dr. Samuel Prescott was afraid he was going to be captured. He took the long route to Back Bay, by to Brighton, over to Cambridge, then up to Lexington Concord. They both started riding towards Lexington Concord when he bumped into another High Sons of Liberty, Dr. Samuel Prescott. Now there's 3 riders heading towards Concord. Paul Revere gets ahead of the other 2, was captured, released several hours later. William Dawes escaped, and the only one out of the 3 to make it to Concord that night was Dr. Samuel Prescott. So 85 years later, Longfellow writes the poem, Listen, my children, you shall hear the midnight ride of. Because it wouldn't have rhymed it. They said, listen, my children, you shall hear the midnight ride of Dr. Samuel Prescott. So he took poetic license and used Paul Revere's name. Remember, he was a poet, not a historian. So he's riding through the countryside warning people. And what was he saying?
The regulars are coming now.
No, they're all British. No.
What was he saying?
He was saying the regulars are out. The regulars are out. They're all British.
My history book.
The Friends, now the Lanterns weren't for Paul Revere. Paul Revere already knew that the British were going by sea to go to Lexington. He already knew that. But he had his friends put the lanterns in the steeple, one up by land, two up by
See.
and they're only up there for 5 seconds. And to warn the people in case Paul Revere was captured, because he had to go through the bay, and it was supposed to have been a clear night. It was a full moon and clouds. He got a little cloudy that night, and he was in the shadows of the clouds as he's going by these British ships sitting in the inner harbor of Boston. The inner harbor is like between the North End and Charleston at that time. And he started his famous ride from there. He was almost captured in Charlestown, turned around and went through Medford. Who's from Medford? Someone's from Medford? Oh, Medford.
No D.
Now, some of your biggest clipper ships in the world were built right in Medford Square. That's all landfill. In the Back Bay, everybody knows the Back Bay's landfill. It took them over 30 years to fill in that area. They worked 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And contrary to belief, they weren't teetotalers. They drank more beer back then than we do today because of brackish water. And brackish water is salt and fresh water mixed. You get sick and even die from drinking it. But they drank more beer back then. Of course, it had less alcohol content than it does today. And they would feed their children what you call little beers because of the brackish water. So you don't have to do a deep research of our history, but Woodrow Wilson, some people like him, some people don't, said an interesting thing. If a nation forgets where it came from, the nation does not know where it's going, and a nation does not know what it is today. We have to know how we got here, how we're going to send the future to the next generation. As adults, we already got our freedom and liberty. We pass it on to our children. That's what makes us different. Over 200, we celebrate one piece of paper, one constitution for over 200 years. France has celebrated 18 brand new constitutions. Europe has celebrated 55 brand new constitutions. They don't know what they want to be. But these men and women knew that if they stood with God and not forsake Him, He would bless this nation. That's why we're blessed. Not perfect, blessed. And that's what they believed in. So the pictures I gave you of the what it says above City Hall in Cambridge, show people. You don't have to argue. Just say, hey, this is what they'll say, well, the Constitution, this doesn't say nothing about God. All our charters in this country, the preamble always mentions God and the love of God and directions of God and the preambles of all our charters. We have to know. So we pass to our children. Our children pass it to their children, and so on and so forth. And this is what these men and women did. Now, the middle picture, that's James Otis, arguing the pompous Governor Hutchinson. He was the most hated person in Boston. They hated him. It's even written in history. If someone was dying of thirst and Governor Hutchinson had the only drinking water, they would rather die than drink his water because he was born here. He grew up with these men and women. He becomes a loyalist. They become patriots. They pledge their lives, their property, and sacred honor. Not that they were perfect, but they knew they had to keep their promise. If they didn't keep their promise back then, no one talked to them. Yeah. Nothing would say. They wouldn't talk to them because their word is no good. So when you go in these graveyards, and these gravestones have stories to tell our children. And they'll tell their children, and so on and so forth. But sitting in the corner right behind James Otis with his hand up in the air pointing to God is John Adams leaning against the wall. And he gave him, James Otis, the credit for our revolution. He said the day he spoke is the day the independence was born, the child independence. He called him the flame of the revolution. 10 years before we even had a skirmish. On the far end is a Boston Tea Party. Over 300 chests of taxable tea. We don't mind paying tea, taxes. We just don't want to pay big taxes. And British common law. Now keep in mind, British common law, a ship can be in dock for 20 days. If it's not unloaded, the captain's allowed to leave with his cargo so you not go bankrupt. The governor took the captain as hostage. We made sure they didn't unload the ship. On the 20th day, the royal governor refused to let the ships go. 3 ships, the Eleanor, the Dartmouth, and the Beaver, loaded down over 300 chests of taxable tea. And that's when the Sons of Liberty would meet at the old State House, then went down to the old South Meeting House, and argue for 6.5 hours. They knew it was treason. They could all die and lose everything. So James Otis, Tim Adams sent 2 men to talk to the royal governor. What are you going to do with the tea? The governor said, we're going to load the tea. If you don't buy it, you're going to still pay the tax on it. That's when Tim Adams gave the code word, there's nothing more we could do to save this country. Went down to the 3 ships and tossed over 300 chests of taxable tea into the icy waters of Boston. That's how we get iced tea. We'll live it. And the king was so mad he got tea off. But it's done by British common law. A British soldier is not allowed to kill a British citizen. Boston Massacre, 5 unarmed men died. That unites everybody together. That sets us on the path for independence. Before the Boston Massacre, 1/3 of the town was for the revolution, 1/3 didn't care, and 1/3 was loyal to the crown. Boston Massacre unites everybody together. If they were alive, these men and women alive today, they would remind us it could be gone that quick. We have to be vigilant. We have to know what we're passing down to our children, their children, our grandchildren. Right below the angel, see the banner? God, what does it say? Talk a little loud, sir. Talk loud.
The Lord is our defense, and
The
the
Lord?
glories and the Holy One of Israel.
All right, now say that real loud so everybody behind you can hear you. Yeah, you can.
She's the loud one.
Okay.
Go ahead.
For the Lord is our defense, and the Holy One of Israel is our King.
That's right. The Bible is shown, that's the Geneva Bible. It's the first Bible. It had to be chapters and verses in English. And that was the Bible of the Puritans. Now, when they left, they would pray. And when they landed here, they would pray. If you ever go to St. Augustine, which I'm very happy to let you know that they still have a cross. Because the first thing they did is knelt down, prayed, and put a cross in the name of God. And, so this here is the Pilgrims. Now the Pilgrims, 1620, Plymouth, 1630 was the Puritans. They were all Puritans, but the Pilgrims got the nickname Separatists. We didn't call ourselves Puritans. We got that nickname because we wanted to stay within the church and change it around. They knew the church is so corrupt, that's why the Pilgrims left it. Puritans want to stay within the church, change it around, got the nickname Puritan. Now that's the first painting of one of the 4 pillars. Now, if you draw a straight line from this painting to the one right behind you, this is Reverend John Eliot. Came over around 1632. He was a minister to the Native Americans, to the Indians. He started 14 praying Indian villages. Anybody ever hear Reverend John Eliot?
There's a mark or two on the wall.
That's right. In Lowell?
Right by the dam.
Huh. What's it say?
Natick too.
It talks
Yeah.
about how he converted a chief there. And the chief lived there in like a village right next to was the falls then, but now it's the Lowell Dam.
Oh,
on the
I'm
map.
going to go up and see that. But this is here in Newton, and he's preaching to the Native Americans from the Old Testament, the Bible, on the Valley of Dry Bones. And he's talking about how the Spirit came down into the valley of dry bones and added muscles and tissues to the bones itself, and he started coming alive. Well, he noticed the Indian chief, his name is Wabin, W-A-B-A-N, Wabin. And the Indians around him are looking at the chief, and they're nodding, he's nodding back to him. Come to find out that he found out that the name Holy Spirit in the Algonquin language is Wabin. And Wabin is the name of the Indian chief, W-A-B-A-N, where you get Wabin Newton. Newton is made up of 5 villages. One is Wabin, it's named after the Indian chief, who became a Christian. So the village followed them in suit. And the town next to it is Nonantha. It means come rejoice in the Algonquin language. So he started 14 Indian praying villages. He ended up learning the Algonquin language. And he writes the Old and New Testament of the Bible in the Algonquin language. Harvard University has 2 of these Bibles written in Algonquin language. 14 Indian prayer villages all over. Natick was the first praying Indian village. Stoughton was the second one. And you can find them all over the place with the Algonquin language. So you get the line from here, from the Pilgrims coming over, Puritans, all the charters was to evangelize the Native Americans, contrary to what they teach in school. So you have the second picture. So you have the Pilgrims who believed in God. They wanted God to be the sole authority, be not man. All our charter is to evangelize the Native Americans, John Eliot, the minister. Now, here is Concord Bridge. In defense of the British was violating British common law. Just a memory of that woman. And this was to save the country, was to take the British off their throne and put God back in what they believed in. How many people have been to Concord? Now here, this is Governor Andrews, who is a good friend of George Whitefield. Actually, he used to take George Whitefield to town, to different villages, and he would send word ahead and say, hey, the governor's going to visit you today. But he didn't tell him he had to minister to George Whitefield in his carriage. And at George Whitefield, the evangelist would evangelize the town. These are the Hall of Flags where we just left. You guys were earlier today, the Hall of Flags being returned, keeping us in unity. And so you can almost say it's an invisible cross of these 4 pillars. These are 4 cornerstones of Massachusetts, known as the 4 pillars. And they all emphasize God itself as being his sole authority and not man. And that's what they believe in. And then, did you see the statue of
David and Goliath?
David and Goliath.
Yeah.
And did you see creation?
You've been to the church where Whitefield is buried?
South Church, yeah.
In Newburyport?
In Newbury, yeah. I've been to almost every place he preached. I even took a trip down to Baskin Ridge, where George Washington and Marquis Lafayette all spoke underneath this giant oak tree, which they had to cut down. And Whitefield spoke there.
Oh, wow.
Back in. Yeah, because I think we're going to get started. Oh, sorry.
We've never been to the church. We have to find out what